about to do a tutorial on how to animate a character in a 2D drawing. We're going to use a boar tusk leer graffiti character. First things, but this is for brand new Photoshop users, so we're going to do a couple basics first. Number one is we can look at image size and we'll see pixel dimensions. The width of this is 1,536 by 2,048. You can always change the width of the pixel. So when we're saving this for the web, we, as an animated GIF, making it 800 by 1,000, or if you're putting it to a Tumblr, maximum 540 width is going to be required. But I wouldn't do that in the beginning. I would always work with the largest resolution in the beginning. The next thing we're going to be looking at are layers. These are going to be layers. By default, a new image is, the layer is locked as a background layer. I'm going to turn this into a layer so I can see transparency behind it. I'm probably not going to use it, but just in case. So I can double click on a background layer, and by default it makes it layer 0, and you can say OK, and now it's a layer, and now I can turn it on and off. Where this gray grid represents transparency in Photoshop. So if you've never seen what transparency looks like in Photoshop, this map looks like transparency. Whenever I'm doing a project like this, the first thing I always do, and I'm right-clicking right now, is I duplicate the layer. So that way, whatever I'm doing, I know I have my original still, right? So I have an original, it's in the file. I'm going to save this Photoshop file, and I'll have it. All right, so let's start with the easy, right? We're going to animate these eyes, all right? Our goal is to animate this guy. We're going to try to wiggle the arms. If I get adventurous, we could go as far as making him dance, maybe, right? That'd be cool, but that'll take more time. But let's start with something like simple, and that's going to be to work with the eyes themselves. So we need to cut out the pupils, all right? And then we need to put each pupil into another layer, or we could keep them in one layer so we could have the movement of them match. So there's a lot of different ways to select things in Photoshop, and selections are a complicated process. We're going to start with an easy one. We're going to start with what's known as the quick selection tool right here. If you click a tool to select it, it's there. It's now active. If you click and hold, you'll see other tools, all right, that are also underneath that. So every tool tends to have more than one, all right? So keep that in mind. Quick selection tool. You can, by default, these are different brush sizes. By hitting the brackets, we can make it bigger. That's bracket left, right. That's close bracket left. So by just changing these, I can change the size of the brush, all right? You can also look at the top, and the options for the tool will always be up here, whatever tool you select, and you may have to enter this space and make changes to the tool itself, all right? So when I click, you can see this for such a great contrast, high contrast, because it's making a selection based on common pixels. So this is black. I don't want the green. So this is really easy to do a selection. So I can just, I've made this selection. We call these the dancing ants of a selection. And I can just say edit. Oops. What are we doing here? Selection. I have to have the layer, an active layer. When I was right here, since this layer was selected and not visible, I can turn it on and off. So remember I was showing you could turn them on and off. If you select a layer that's not visible, notice there's nothing to copy. It's like, whoa, I can't copy, I can't paste, because that layer is not visible. So I had to switch to the copied layer. So I'm going to say edit, copy, edit, paste, all right? And now I have those two eyeballs by themselves. Okay. If I wanted to, I could make these super dark black really easily by just doing an adjustment. There's a lot of different brightness contrast. My favorite is curves, and I'm just going to make the blacks blacker. I could keep pushing on this if I wanted to. All right, it's up to you, and you can make middle points. All right, the whites are on the other side. Okay, so those are options to think about. Is you could do basic contrast adjustments too. So the eyes are there. They're darker now than they were before. But now I need to go back to this layer, and I need to make this green. So how do I do that? Well, the thing to recognize is this is not just one color green. As I zoom in, you can see this green is a complex arrangement of greens of various pixels. So we need to kind of copy and paste these complex sets of greens on top of this so it matches the immediate area. So if we pick just one green and tried to paint it, so if I tried to say, for example, switch to a brush and picked any green and tried to paint it, it doesn't look right? It seems like this weird green spot. So instead of using a paintbrush, we use what's called the clone stamp. And I'm going to make this a little bigger. And we can affect, what's important is the hardness, is the edge of the tool. So is it going to be what's called feathered, where there's a soft edge, or is it going to be a hard edge? Okay, and that's what the hardness of the brush is called. So in order to use this tool, it says, I tried to click and it says, you haven't chosen an area. Option click to define a source point. Okay, so I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I say, okay, this area looks good place to copy. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to click on that, and then I go over, and you can see it's like, oh, I'm going to copy these pixels. And then I choose that area, and now I can paint with that. So that's one. And I'm moving over. I'm using the space bar to switch to the hand so I can click and drag. Because navigating in an image without having this, and zooming in and out is the space bar command to get plus, space bar command option to get minus, right? So getting some, these are, I'm using my left hand because I'm a righty. So I option select. And I can just erase that. Oh, I ran into the hand. There we go. All right. So now, when I turn the eyes on, I got eyeballs. All right. Okay. One of the nice things to always look for is to have what's called the history palette visible. You see this little icon right here? And I hover over it, it tells me what it is. It's the history palette. To undo things, you can do multiple levels of undo. So I can go back and say, I wish I hadn't changed that color value, right? And so I just pasted the eyes, and the curves were the selection, but there you can see the curves are where we see, and then the clone stamps, right? So I'm going to go back to the paste, and then I'm just going to redo the clone stamp really quickly here. Oops. Let's see. Have to have the right layer selected. Oops. Have to have the eyes hidden. Oops. And so sometimes what's good is you have to keep sampling other places, and that's kind of my strategy. And I could say like, I want to even straighten this out. I could maybe using the Control key, I'm going to make this brush a little harder, and I'm going to kind of get rid of this line here. All right. Same thing over here. A little sloppy. All right, like that. And you could keep going. I could make this. I could, if I wanted to really rework. Oh, that's too hard to brush. I could keep doing all this touching up, however I wanted to do it. I'm not enjoying that. That looks terrible. This is where undos are useful. So I got eyeballs. They're on a layer that's on top, and I have on the background a layer that has the eyeballs filled. with the common background. So how do I animate those eyeballs? All right, let's move these eyeballs. So what's cool about Photoshop is they have a timeline tool, which may not be visible when you open it. And in order to make it visible, if you don't see it, it's under the window menu, and the timeline needs to be selected. All right, if you see that check mark, that means the timeline is visible. And by default, you may see create video timeline or create frame animation. We want to create a frame animation. There's value to using the other tool, but for this tutorial, we're just going to do a frame animation. And so a frame is set for a period of time. And in that frame, you can have a setting. So I'm going to choose, you can choose 0.1 seconds. I'm going to change this probably to something faster, 0.06 seconds. And this is just based on experience. And there's all these different options here. This is the most important one is I can just simply duplicate this frame. So right now in this frame, the eyeballs are on, off. In this frame, the eyeballs are also off, but all I have to do is turn them on. So in this frame, these two layers are visible. And in frame one, only the background is visible. So we have an animation we can do. So right now, just by switching.
But like, for example, the first picture you turn on layer 1 and layer 0 would happen.
Well, layer 0 is just my background. That's my default. I'm not using it. Yeah, it's the original image. I kind of keep it. Layer 0 copy because we're not renaming things. So here, we can rename this. This is the background, right? And we'll say this is the clean background, right? And we should start to, it's good to label things. This is the pupils, right? And so in one layer, they're on, they're off. And just by changing this forever and I hit play, you can see the eyeballs going on and off, right? So that works, but that's not what I want to do. I want them on all the time and I want to move them. Now the fun thing about Photoshop is, I'm going to switch to the Move tool right here. And the timeline allows you to move a layer horizontal or vertical, and I'm going to keep them together. You could do them separately, but for this, I think I'll keep them together. And it changes position of the object in the layer from frame to frame, all right? So now, if I hit forever, they're going back and forth really fast, right? And I might not like that. And that's super fast, and I can duplicate these layers, and I can go back, and I can move them back a little bit. And so now I have 3 frames, and I can keep going. And you can see the difference. And you just keep repositioning the eyeballs, the pupils, right? So we're here. Maybe we'll start those not so far away. We go to here, to here. Maybe these aren't so far over. Oh, I got moved off. And so now they're starting to move around, and one's a little off. Yeah. So you have to keep editing it to get what you want. So that's the basics of it, and that's what you do. And so when you're done, you can say, "Oh, I'm all done." I'm going to make this smaller because that's a huge GIF. And I'm going to say File, Export, Save for Web. All right. I want to make sure it's in the GIF format. And there's a lot of different changes you can make that affect the file size. Dithering is noise that's placed in the image so that you can see that's with a dither. If I have no dither, you'll see there's less noise. I also can add up to 256 colors per frame. And so as I add this dither, you can see more points. But correspondingly, the size will get bigger, all right? So you have to make decisions and kind of sometimes compromise size and to the piece itself. But ultimately, once you've made some selections and you can increase the amount of dither percentage-wise, you can choose methods of dithering, which restrictive is very different in terms of it restricts to the color palette. It takes over and does not give you a selection of a number of colors. And if we hit save, and we have, this is quick for Tusclear animation. One of the nice things that Photoshop does is it knows this is for the web, so it automatically puts hyphens because it's bad form to use file names with spaces in them. Because a server needs to know what a space is, and a space becomes a character, and a space is actually a combination of 3 characters. When you actually load it to the web, it converts it to 3 characters, which is very confusing, so it's better to use. So, and if I open this with Chrome, it's a GIF. And it's really sloppy. But it's a start, okay? And that's the beginning. I will show you one more quick one. My favorite way to do selections, and then I'm gonna get this mouth. I'm gonna use what's called the pen tool, which is right here. The pen tool is a good tool to get to know if you work in Photoshop a lot because you're creating paths. When I click and drag, well, actually, I'll do this. So if I just click, I can make, these polygons, right, with hard angles. I'm going to delete that. But if I click and drag, I make these handles, which allow me to make curved points. And so I can make this selection that I can choose and get this, instead of using the selection tool, because this would be, there's so many different color pixels, to use the quick selection tool with this object would be pretty difficult, right? Because there's so many changes in colors going on. The quick selection tool would struggle. You could try, and I would encourage you to do that. Because it's good to get to know these tools and find out their limitations and adjust the parameters of the tool and see if you can improve the quality of the selection. And so I've made what's called a path, which is one of the palettes next to the layers palette. And I'm going to just quickly double click it and make it save the path. But then I'm going to use this menu by the paths menu in the paths window that allows me to turn that into a selection. And I'm going to say I don't want a feather. A feather is, again, like that kind of soft brush versus hard edge brush. So I don't want a feather. I want it exactly my line. And so now I have this selection. And I can go back, and I again have to go to the clean background, and I'm going to copy paste this. And now I have the mouth and the eyes, separate objects, right? But I got some serious work to do to clean out this mouth. So I have to look at, like, oh, where are there good browns? This is a good source of brown right here, probably to work from. And that's where I'm going to work from primarily. I have to, again, make sure I have the right layer selected. And yes? Command T is free transform. So I can copy this, and I'm going to have to do a lot of jumping back and forth because the area is so limited. Because if I go to, whoops, if I try to go too long, you can see I'm copying other spaces, right? So I have to keep and I try to go back and forth to different spots, so it's not exactly the same spot. And I have to keep reselecting until I'm slowly but surely successfully eliminating. Sometimes maybe I'll go up here, so I'm matching the area right above it, so it's not too different. And now it doesn't have to look perfect, because remember the mouth is going to go back over most of this, right? You know, you're creating a space that for an animation that primarily is going to be covered by this digital object. So just to see in the middle, you're like, oh, that looks pretty good, right? And you can see the edge is it's a little hard edge, but I don't care. I like that, right? That's like the other one, the final version. Getting there. This takes time. And then, at a certain point, if I think the quality of my area is good enough, which I'm not sure. Oops. I could maybe make this brush a little bigger and use this area, right? And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Command Z is your friend. Almost there. Command Z. So you can see I keep hitting the Option key and I keep reworking it until, now that's a pretty big area to have cleaned up, right? And it seems relatively successful, right? Now I can see the mouth. Hey, right? And maybe that feather might have been nice, so this looks a little too harsh an edge. I'm going to use the blur tool, not the backstroke, the blur tool. And I'm going to soften these edges. Whoops, I got to make sure that right. You always got to remember to hit the right layer selected. And I could soften that edge a little bit, right? So it doesn't look so harsh. See how that's working? Soften, soften, soften. Soften, soften, soften. Soften, soften, soften. It's good to let go of the mouse every once in a while. So what you did last is remember how you're doing. Oh my gosh, we're almost out of time. All right, so this tutorial's almost done. Now, here's the last one I'm going to show you. This is the fun part. Ready? So we got one mouth. I'm going to duplicate this mouth because I'm going to make versions of this mouth because I want to distort them. All right. I could choose a bunch of different things to do, but one of the things I can choose to do is what's called a puppet warp. I'm going to say Edit, Puppet Warp, and there's this mesh on the mouth now. And I can make points to distort. So I could do this where I'm changing the position of the mouth. All right. All right. And I hit return, and now I have another version of that. So here's two versions of it, so you can see them at the same time. But I also can just now turn on the other version. Gosh, there's so many different things going on. I'm not paying attention to the layer. Right? A little out of control. So, but that's not the best of animation, but it's showing the potential. of what you can do, all right? And then everything else holds. You can do a save as. But the puppet warp tool is really exciting. Like, you can do some wacky stuff. So I could keep working on versions of this mouth. And so I could just duplicate this layer, right? Turn this one off. And again, go to Edit, Puppet Warp. Because I could say my goal is to, move from a mouth that's kind of, I could say my goal is to eventually move from like more of a flat mouth to a smile, right? All right. So I slowly have these different versions, and then I could figure out how to animate them over time. All right. And that looks silly because it doesn't have a purpose. I probably wouldn't end up using the original mouth. I would probably just do something with the original one. And then you could do other things. You could do, I could close the mouth, like I could erase this and work from a flat, like a line instead. So there's lots of stuff you can do. That's the beginning of how all that works. Try to have an intention when you're working with a 2D object, like goals to say, I think I could animate those objects, and I think I could duplicate that background layer or something. And then you're on your way. And that's it. All right.